Technology. It's almost sort of the idea of like you have a Maaser calculator now. Is it from gross income or is it after tax? What deductions should be allowed against gross income? So, like giving that's if it doesn't go to the poor, but maybe it's going towards a mitzvah. These are all issues that what are there accounting periods and timing rules that we adopt? This goes beyond whatever is happening, with the accountant. What about an inheritance? Or let's say you inherit real estate. So should you sell 10% of that to immediately give that to charity? That's a question that's addressed in Jewish law. It's a question that basically Jewish law says you don't have to. It's not sort of that this inheritance is viewed as money that you've now earned that you have to immediately give 10%. So it's not all, even Jewish law recognizes that all things are not considered equal. What about taxes? What about pre-tax, post-tax? So Jewish law actually has a precedent for this. Text number 13. One need not tithe before paying taxes. One need not tithe the money paid in taxes, comparable to peah, which the owner did not have to tithe. Peah was the corner of the field that had to be left for the poor. So your Maaser bill was only calculated excluding the peah. So the amount that you have to give anyway doesn't count. So this would seem to be a very good precedent that you figure calculating your Maaser is after taxes.
Speaking of that,
Yeah.
isn't the peah itself the Maaser? Since,
Right.
well, why? Since part of my field I already leave fallow for whoever wants to come and take.
Because remember, going back to Maaser was specifically agricultural commitment, not a charitable commitment. Maaser, peah was tzedakah. You fulfill the mitzvah tzedakah through peah. Right.
For the people who are needy, who need the grain.
Right.
We've now sort of merged the two. But this is sort of, this is pretty interesting, in terms of, if that's true, it becomes interesting to calculate, what is your tax bill, what is your tzedakah bill? Your tax bill is only calculated factoring in your tzedakah. So it's sort of, when all said and done, how does it get figured out? There's an interesting, statement of Rabbi Chaim Ibn Attar that sort of sets this up for a future discussion. Or, what about providing gifts and services for people? Let's say you do pro bono work for someone. How does that work? Does that count in one's tzedakah? Certainly it counts in tzedakah. So if you're whatever the profession is, if you are giving to someone, providing a service that the person needs, not necessarily the person wants. So someone took the class last night, was a dentist, and filling a filling would be one thing, but teeth whitening may not qualify because you don't necessarily need the teeth whitening.
Let's say you're obligated to give the pro bono. Does that matter?
So if you're obligated to give the pro bono, then it does matter.
Okay.
Because think back to text number 6,
Yeah.
which talked about things that you owe
Right.
don't count as your tzedakah.
It's usually professionally you owe sometimes pro bono.
Depends, especially lawyers in certain firms.
Accountants and lawyers sometimes owe it.
Correct. So it's sort of, so if you owe it, then it doesn't count.
Doesn't count.
So it creates different, again, Jewish law has created this whole sense of mishpat to try and compel some additional giving, as the idea of tzedakah, of being reactive or responsive to a specific dire poverty need, seem to have received from religious consciousness. And that's how the whole system became created. There's several books out there about Maaser Ksafim that talk about this sort of 10% of your income giving it to charity. What we have seen is that it's not necessarily automatically an obligation. It's certainly a value. I'm not going to discourage you from giving 10% at least away, but it's not necessarily part of the mitzvah of tzedakah. Yeah?
If you have children over 13 and they get an allowance, or they have a big party and they receive many gifts,
Right.
and we usually encourage them to give 10% of it to tzedakah, or are they obligated?
Well,
or is
again,
that just teaching?
We have to use the terms that we have seen. There's a mitzvah of tzedakah. There's a value of Maaser Ksafim. There are a lot of contributing factors or mitigating factors into how much they have to give exactly. In general, I think that that one of the other problems that has happened with this focus on Maaser Ksafim is we sort of, okay, do you have to give anymore? Because you start, then it's like you start calculating, and I spent money on this, spent money on that. Oh, my tzedakah bill pot is $850. Because you remove so many things from what you have to give up, because I do tuition in religious life, and I'm going to apply the Rabbi Shneur Zalman's approach, and not Rabbi Moshe Isserlis's, and anything I spend on Jewish causes. My whole life is a Jewish life, so I don't have to give any tzedakah. That's sort of the flip side of what's happened. It's like a roller coaster ride. Ultimately, the goal is to be charitable. What's happened is that they superimposed another type of charitable giving to encourage more charitable giving, which then the pushback was creating a whole system of, well, what exactly do I give? Do I, don't I, etc., which then has us thinking more about do I and don't I have to give rather than being responsive. And I think the goal has to be to try and come back to a happy medium of giving charity. Yeah.
But is he?
Rabbi, I think at the children's
Yeah,
museum.
he's obligated to give tzedakah. How much?
Even if it's not
Depends.
worth income, it's just.
Correct, no.
Well, the inheritance we
Correct.
also.
Right.
It's even worse.
You didn't.
Should give.
Right, anything you have to
You
be
work for it.
charitable.
Rabbi,
If you have to give 10%, no.
you know what? In Crown Heights, they have the children's museum and they have the little golf.
Mhm.
So there's a sign right before you step out into the kids' golf, and it says that in your 20s you basically give of your time as tzedakah, but in your 30s you're already obligated to give financially.
All right, depends
Which is-
what,
I think
depends
there has to
what
be a
people
law.
have.
There has to be a law because back in Colombia, in the Jewish community, after you turn 30, you have to become a member of the community and give. You can't just say my parents are members and I don't have to join in.
Look, different communities set up different systems and
But
different
in this
values.
country, for instance,
no, well, no, again, you have to remember, being a member of a community means very different things in New York than it does in other countries where being part of a religious community is a significant part of your identity. Here you can be a member of 4 different shuls. Yeah?
No,
Four?
only 3,
Oh.
sorry. So, other religious groups that tithe, I assume they're not quite this analytical about, what do? They just do it with the gross off the net, or do
Yeah,
they have an
gross.
analysis?
Gross.
The gross, okay, and it's just 1, 2, 3, and no one's
Yeah.
noticing it to death, okay.
But it often goes towards the salary of
I assume it goes right to
the church, of the functioning of the church.
Right, instead of dues.
Right.
Correct, because they don't
Their
have to-
tithing doesn't have to go specifically to poor people per se.
Right, it goes to the church, and I assume that's.
Have
what
you ever
they-
seen-
Reverend.
What?
Those mega churches. That's going to be my next gig.
Mega
Joel Osteen, I told you, he's my favorite.
You're gonna
The-
be a mega church rabbi?
I'm all for it.
Working on it. So, but Karen, getting to your question, this idea, what's preferable? One big check or smaller ones over time? One giant act of tzedakah or multiple acts of tzedakah? I don't think it's a yes or either or question. It depends on the scenario. Sometimes big gifts are necessary, sometimes small gifts are necessary. Jewish law seems to provide, put a little emphasis on each individual step. The idea of training oneself to be charitable. The idea that anyone who asks, give them a little something. Walk around with a lot of change, although these days change isn't worth anything. You give change and throw it at me. But the idea of engendering a sense of being charitable, which is why the idea of having a tzedakah box in the home and just putting some coins in it, the idea of training to give charity. There's an occupational hazard. A colleague of mine tells a story about it. In one family, they had a charity box, a tzedakah box, a pushka, and they would always say, coins would go in the pushka, coins would go in the pushka. And even the little kids always, penny in the pushka, penny in the pushka. One day the father left his wallet, on the table. And the little kid took the wallet, and there was some change in it, and he came home, and the wallet was all scattered, and the money was gone. What happened? The change went in the pushka. Where'd the bills go? In the garbage, because he thought it was just scraps of paper.
Yeah.
So, you have to train a little bit, the value of, maybe this is a reason to give money into the dollars into the pushka. That's what they're saying, the idea of, but the idea of creating a sense of generosity is engendered by smaller gifts over time. What about the unworthy recipient? Is there this idea within Judaism of being discriminating in the giving? So look at text 16 on page 116. So Rav Huna said, we investigate before giving food, we don't investigate before giving clothing. Rabbi Yehuda said, we investigate before giving clothing, we don't investigate before giving food. So what's the reason? What's Rav Huna's position? What's Rav Yehuda's position?
They're opposite.
They're opposite? Okay, that is true.
And therefore, you should not judge what you get.
So you
Okay.
go,
Rav Huna is saying you can can see by their clothing whether or not potentially they're in need. You can't really tell if they're hungry.
Right.
So if they appear in clothing that does not, they're not in clothing, then you would be more likely to just say, okay, you believe them.
Okay, well, you don't want people running around the street naked. If he says, help me out, maybe, you don't want him to be naked, give him some clothes. Okay. Any other thoughts on Rav Huna or Rav Yehuda? Who's more discriminating? I think Rav Huna is more discriminating. Someone says, I'm hungry, help me out, you don't automatically give the money. Rav Yehuda sounds a little bit like the policeman giving the guy shoes. Right? You didn't ask any questions, the guy's barefoot, you give him something, you give him some, Rav Huna talks about you don't investigate for clothing. Rav Yehuda would say, no, you gotta ask the homeless guy if he really needs the shoes or not. But Rav Huna, the idea if someone says, I'm hungry, please give me something to eat, he doesn't say just give him immediately. He says, you gotta investigate. And so there is this precedent in the Jewish tradition of trying to get a sense of why a person needs what he or she needs. That said, Jewish ethics, as presented in text number 17, talks about do not withhold tzedakah from anyone who asks. It is better to give for the sake of heaven to one who does not really need it than to refrain from giving those who truly do need it. The idea that we mentioned before, this idea of being more charitable as being a good value. The story of the Hasidic Rebbe once asked the wealthy person, how come he doesn't give more to charity? The guy says, I'm very particular about who gets my money. And the Rebbe said, it's sort of interesting, your money is not so extraordinary to require only worthy recipients to get it. Proof positive, you have it. So it's sort of the idea of being so discriminating, you sort of have to weigh what it means to withhold, what it means to give, in terms of people in need. The idea of, in general, as Rabbi Abohav says in text number 17, this idea of engendering a feeling of generosity towards others, or compassion towards others, emerges out of the idea of tzedakah. So it's not always black and white. I think that we have seen from the original sources of tzedakah, which were superimposed and combined with the idea of ma'aser, and there being a value giving 10% in tzedakah, and there being a whole host of questions and details and variables that control or determine what goes and how much goes and when it goes and where it goes. Ultimately, really we end where we began. The idea of recognizing that tzedakah is a complex mitzvah and is not always appropriate to give in every type of situation. In general, nowadays when I get a phone call around anytime between 6 and 8 from the 347 area code, I know some tzedakah calling who's going to mispronounce my name and has no idea who I am, is going to ask me. And we have sort of like the joke of some of these organizations, the way the people call up and they don't even know how to pronounce the organization that they're representing. All right, so you can send something in the mail, give it some thought. And they got to watch out because they, and they'll all say, oh, so what you gave last time? I didn't give anything last time. So if you're dealing with people who aren't necessarily so on the up and up, you may not have to respond with such sensitivity. I clearly don't. But the idea of recognizing that at the end of the day, we sort of end where we began. Compassion, tzedakah, generosity is a value that needs to be strengthened more than anything else, which is why I proudly skirt the law and sometimes give to people in the summer. If you want to make your citizens arrest, I just said it in the tape, you can use it against me, but the idea of creating that sense of generosity is really what tzedakah is all about, with all of the details that we have explored. We will pick up next week, lesson 4. I know that there's some vacation next week. You can't be here, you can't be here, but we will continue on in our exploration of family royalty, the ethics of filial responsibility.
Did you read did you read this? Is that any good?